Welcome, Season Sixers. As always, thank you for being part of our Color Success podcast family. I'm your favorite host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Keep your eyes peeled for my brand new book coming out. It's called Cancel the Filter, where I share my experiences in the realm of mental health, both professionally and personally. Subscribe to colorsuccesspodcast.com to be on our waiting list. Seats are limited and being filled as we speak. We're also streaming on all your favorite platforms and socials. Whether you're on the go or comfy on the couch, you can tune in at your own comfort. As you know, we love growing discussions with our guests from our AAPI and minority communities. With so many friends and experts from different aspects of life, we love learning their stories and understanding what their success means to them. Let's get into it. Grace Young Foster is the founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. At 3 years old, Grace was orphaned and abandoned at the local market in South Korea. She eventually ended up in the U.S. foster care system to be adopted. Her very difficult experience as a transracial adoptee and foster youth in a predominantly white community influenced her internalized racism and feeling like she never truly belonged anywhere. Now, she has created a community of belonging for those who share her lived experiences. Grace, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I'm really excited to talk to you about your experiences, and shout out to Jerry Fu for connecting us.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell me about the Inclusion Initiative and how this was inspired by your experiences as a transracial adoptee and someone from the foster youth system.
Yeah, it is an experience I could talk about for hours.
But we're here to dive deep into it.
Yes, but to kind of break it down into, why the Inclusion Initiative was born. As a transracial adoptee and foster care alumni, what happened to me and to many others like me was that I was placed into a home, a community, an ecosystem that didn't reflect who I was at all and didn't celebrate who I was as an Asian American, as a person of color, as someone different, right? And transracial adoptees, many of us are adopted into homes that have white parents in predominantly white neighborhoods and white communities. And so our entire lives, we navigate these spaces, assimilating as much as possible to white culture and really trying to, for lack of better terms, be as white as possible. Mm. And what that does, right, is really enhance and cultivate this inner dialogue, this inner belief that we're not worthy, we don't belong, right? Because we don't belong in the white space, very clear everywhere on our faces. But we also don't belong in the spaces of the people and cultures where we come from. So I was born in South Korea, but, having been taken out of that culture, losing my language, losing the food, like just losing all of that, I didn't get to bring that into the white spaces that I was in. And so when I would meet people that were from Korea or even from Asia throughout my journey through adulthood, it was very clear that I was not the same depth of Asian that they were, right?
You couldn't identify with that.
I couldn't identify with that. I didn't know what that meant because I was never allowed to embrace that or really celebrate that. And in turn, what happened was, there was a lot of internalized racism that happened for me personally. And I hear this a lot with transracial adoptees that I talk to, no matter, if they're Asian or if they're from the Black community or, South American community, whatever it is, we often have, these narratives inside of ourselves that are stemmed from the white culture that we lived in. And, you know, just colonialism in general, right? We as a country are navigating through all of that.
Yes. So, well, let's pause for a second because we're throwing out a lot of terms that maybe the audience is not as familiar with. So, first, from your perspective, how do you define transracial adoptee?
The transracial adoptee is really when there's a person, and typically, right, it's a child because adults aren't typically adopted, but children that are adopted and placed into a home whose members do not share their race. So that's what a transracial adoptee is. So very commonly in the US, especially, it's white parents adopting youth of color and from a different race and ethnicity.
And also internalized racism. I'm very familiar with it from a psychological perspective, but to your understanding and your experience, how would you define that term?
Yeah, internalized racism for me specifically, you know, I don't want to speak for other people because it may show up differently for them. But, you know, for me as an individual and how I experienced it and how I define it is really having taken on the racist narratives that we often hear against people of color. And for me specifically, it was being an Asian person and believing those narratives and really internalizing those beliefs within myself, right? That I should act and behave a certain way, that I wasn't as good as white society. And that's what I needed to strive for because I was Asian, right? And I didn't belong. And, you know, I didn't deserve certain things because I was an Asian person instead of a white person. And instead of embracing being an Asian person and embracing my culture and my heritage and really who I was and where I came from, I rejected all of that and really threw that to the side to try and fit in as much as possible with the white community. And for me, that's what internalized racism meant, to the point of even not even appreciating how I looked, like I not thinking I was attractive, and again, not thinking that I was worthy and belonged anywhere.
Did you try to change how you looked in different ways? I mean, obviously you see the face. Like you clearly aren't white, but you know, Sheena Yap Chan talked about she wanted the blonde hair, the blue eyes. And so now there's, you know, contact lenses, hair dye. Like, was there any aspect of that where you tried to externally assimilate for better or for worse in the community that you were, you know, raised in?
Yeah, I resonate with her with what she said. I also longed and wished for the blonde hair and blue eyes. But physically, I wasn't able to change any of that. I didn't have the resources growing up. But what I could do, like what I was allowed to do, was perm my hair. So I gave myself curls, right? I wanted that curly, beautiful American hair. And so that's one example. Another example is how we utilize makeup, right? So I utilize makeup to try and give myself more Western features versus embracing my Asian features. And so that took me a long time to overcome.
Well, talking about internalized racism, not feeling like you belonged, what was your experience going through the foster care system? And again, how have these experiences really translated in your life to want to help other people?
Yeah, and thank you for circling back on all of that. So going back to, you know, the earlier point that I was making, like how all of these experiences really had built up throughout my life and my adulthood. And, you know, being a foster youth, it looks very differently for individuals that go through the system. I had siblings, foster siblings, that were placed in 10 homes, 12 homes, like by the time they're 5 years old. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so really saw what trauma that caused and how that really changed a person, even a person as little as 5 years old. And for me, you know, I was fortunate enough to be fostered into one home and then eventually adopted. So I lived in that home as a foster child for about a year and then was adopted by them. But before that, right, I had been in multiple homes because of broken adoption that I had been through. I was brought into the US by a family that wanted to adopt me and brought me over from Korea, and it didn't work out, right? So 2 years in, they decided they didn't want me and then placed me into foster care. And then before that, I had been in 2 orphanages in South Korea. So I had, experienced like these systems kind of over and over again, being placed into multiple homes, even though it wasn't the formalized system of the foster care system here. But all of that, it really leaves a tremendous gap, not only in identity, but in community and in network and in opportunity.
I would say attachment too, because as a child, you're really trying to bond with your caregivers and you're not in a position to care for yourself, like literally and figuratively. And the way that you described it, I was almost envisioning being treated like an object, almost like treated like a doll, like I don't want you anymore, like you use those phrases, and that's really, really painful.
Yeah, it is. What I can say to that is, yes, you feel dehumanized in a way, especially after multiple placements like that.
Right.
And a lot of foster youth experience that multiple home placement over and over again, where they're staying for 6 months to a year, maybe 2 years if they're lucky. But yeah, it almost, and they do have to detach themselves, right? They don't allow themselves to become attached to any one person or family, because in their minds, and rightfully so, they're just going to leave.
Right.
And for me, right, personally, I also put up those walls and put up those barriers, not wanting to really attach and form relationships where I would be hurt. And that really carried on through my adult life. And, as we grow and evolve as humans, right, that can be healed and it can be worked on, but it's a super long process. And we're living life during all the healing that we're doing. And so, coming into adulthood, trying to navigate school and what college means and what does it mean to work on your own? Like, not just, right, I had part-time jobs in high school and all that kind of stuff, but what does it mean to completely be on your own and navigate the world when you don't have a family to lean on? You don't have a community to lean on. You don't have a network, and you don't feel like you belong anywhere. It's super hard to navigate all that. And it really sets a lot of transracial adoptees, especially, and foster care alumni of color, especially, it sets them back 5 years, 10 years from achieving professional milestones that others who are not in their situation, right? They don't have to necessarily navigate those challenges and barriers because they don't have those lived experiences. And so professionally, as I was starting to achieve certain milestones, getting jobs that I never thought were possible for someone like me. I have an MBA from NYU now, things like that. It was like, whoa, this is really cool. This is great. But look at what I've had to do to get here.
You have to go through to be in those spaces.
To be in those spaces and talking with classmates or like peers in the workplace and learning, they obviously have challenges, right? Everyone has to navigate challenges in their lives. But in terms of like professional achievements, their journey was, it just had a lot fewer barriers than mine did. And, it was to the point where I was having peers in the workplace who were getting paid just as much as me or even more than me, or were my superiors or in the same positions as I was, but they were 5 years younger, some 10 years younger. And it made me just realize, like, okay, I have accomplished a lot. I've achieved a lot, but it's taken this kind of road to get here because of the barriers I faced
Right.
as
There's
a
a gap.
transracial adoptee
Mhm.
and former foster youth. And that it shouldn't be like that, right? I shouldn't have to wait 10 years to get the same opportunity someone 10 years younger is getting at the same time. And I know that this is a challenge for many in our community. And I was looking for this resource, and I was looking for this kind of community and professional support, even something simple as a mentor that I could really lean on and who would understand my lived experience and help me navigate, right, and skill build around the challenges that I had to help me be able to achieve professional milestones that I was pursuing. But I could never find a mentor where I could have like that real authentic connection with.
And we know mentorship is just so important to advance careers and also just have those, again, build an attachment to somebody who really truly cares about your well-being and your professional development.
Exactly. Absolutely. And again, it's like that small community within a community where you feel like you belong, you're
So
included.
the inclusion initiative sounds like you are trying to fill the gap for folks that have had similar experiences and, not assuming, of course, that they're just like yours, but that need that mentorship, that need that space to help propel them and reach their potential.
Yeah. And in the workplace, in the professional sphere specifically, because I wasn't able to find it. And I looked for almost 3 years, I was looking for this and couldn't quite. There's pieces of it here and there, but there's not a central place where we can all go and really find this resource. And for me, as a professional that's further along in their career, has achieved some of these milestones, my thoughts were, well, I'm at a place now where I can be that person for somebody, but there's no program here for me to be able to provide that. There's no space. I can't find people because being transracially adopted, and being a foster care alumni, they're not things you just openly talk about in the workplace.
Oh yeah.
you don't know.
I went through 5 foster care homes. Like that comes up in regular conversation and meetings and stuff. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And again, I'm being sarcastic, guys. I'm like, it takes a level of vulnerability to get there, right? And even you putting out there in your bio, like you were found in a South Korean market. I mean, those are not natural things that kind of come out in conversation. So I think it's really also facilitating the conversation. Like, yeah, even to get to these spaces, these are the experiences that folks have had to go through. So, there's been a lot of advocates on social media nowadays about even the pitfalls of adoption. And I know I watched this documentary on YouTube about some South Korean adoptees that had biological families that wanted them, that loved them. And then they disappeared because this one shady agency were rounding up South Korean children because there was this demand in the US for adoptees from South Korea, for Asian adoptees. And so what are your thoughts in terms of some of the pitfalls of adoption in general? Not overgeneralizing it, but just there are benefits and then there are also pitfalls to it.
Yeah, I think what I want to focus on is really how it impacts the adoptee and impacts like the narrative of adoption and how that really impacts an adoptee's entire life and experience.
Absolutely.
In our society and Western culture in general, the narrative of adoption really is of this, perfect storm of things happening, right? There's a family in a developing country that can't take care of their child, or something traumatic happened, and woe is them, and here are these white parents that are coming to save them.
Yes, the savior complex.
The savior complex, lifting them up out of this dire situation where they had no choice. And so they gladly, relinquish their child to be saved so that they can have a better life. And then the child has this great life in this home that doesn't reflect their culture or their community or heritage at all. But it doesn't matter, right? Because they were saved and they're in the better situation because of it. And honestly, that might be true for maybe a couple of adoptees, right? That might feel like that really captures their experience. For the 99% of us, that absolutely does not capture our experience with adoption. But that is the dominant narrative in our society. And what that does is really harm and really stop our ability, right, to have our own voice and to have choices and to explore who we really are and what we really want to become and what really matters to us. Because this whole narrative of the savior complex of adoption is that we should be grateful.
Yes.
We should be quiet. We need to fit in and assimilate as much as possible, which means that, right, we don't get to be real people. We only get to be what society is telling us we need to be. And I know that that translates, right, across many different communities of color that experience this kind of thing. But for adoptees especially, it impacts every aspect of our life because we can never talk about how we actually truly feel about our lived experience. We always have to pretend. The 99% of us have to pretend, right, that it's okay with us. Right. That yes, we're so grateful. And what I want to also put out there as well, and many adoptee advocates talk about this, and foster care advocates talk about this, right? Two things can be true at once. Of course, we're grateful that there was a home provided for us. And of course, we're grateful that, we get to be who we are today. But it's also true that we deserve to know the truth of what actually happened to us, right? And we deserve to have real feelings about it. It's not okay that we're pulled away from our cultures and placed into situations where we can never embrace who we really are, to the point where we have, like for me, internalized racism against ourselves and against people that look like us. That's horrible. And to navigate life like that,
it's so hard. And especially as a child, like what messages to internalize and believe and form your own opinion. The other part is, don't even get me started on foster families that abuse children, abuse adoptees. And it's like, there may be this image that this family is so caring and wants to take care of other children, but that's a clinical weak spot of mine. I don't understand that. Like, what are they there to really gain from? And so that's another piece, is that, it's one thing to want to help children, and you may have that savior complex. And there's another thing where you're actually psychologically and physically harming children. Like, that boggles my mind. Just stay out of it. Like, stay out of it completely.
Yes. And as an adoptive parent, it's your job to ensure like that trauma is addressed and that these issues are addressed for the child. The child doesn't know any better. Like, they don't know how to express these feelings and emotions. They don't know that they experience trauma from abandonment, separation, et cetera, et cetera. But, there's a lot of lack of education that happened, especially, in the decades where I was adopted. I feel like it's getting better now in terms of at least increased awareness and intentionality for parents that are adopting, but we got a long way to go. And in the meantime, the millions of us that were adopted or in the foster care system back when there was an education, right? We're still needing that support with our mental health. We're still needing that support with reclaiming our stories. We're still needing that support of embracing our identities, however we want to identify, right? I'm proudly Asian American now. It took me till I was 35 years old to say that. That is not okay. So, we need all of that support right now in real time as we're making things better for the next generation. But there's still that gap that's there in all spheres of our lives. But for me, I was seeing it really crucially in the professional sphere, which is why I'm building the Inclusion Initiative. Yeah.
Well, what are some strategies that folks can do to start on their journey of building their identity and really being mindful of how to integrate some of these cultural aspects? Because like you said, when you first started, you're like, I don't really identify with some of the South Korean cultures or the individuals that may be embedded in the community. And I don't feel like I really belong in the community that I grew up in. So what kind of helped you bridge the gap in terms of moving forward and building your identity, and what can people do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that I'm still bridging that gap. So I am nowhere close to where I want to be in terms of fully understanding who I am and want to be from a cultural perspective, from an identity perspective. So it's always like a work in progress, right? We always need to be working towards educating ourselves and getting better with all of that. But for us who have experience as transracial adoptees and foster care alumni who were placed into communities and homes, right, where now we're grappling with, like, how do I embrace my culture and my heritage and who I am? My first piece of advice is immerse yourself in this community. So there are a lot of people of color talking about what it means to them to be an adoptee, a transracial adoptee, a foster care alum, and they are sharing their stories, their experiences. So that's one, right? Because you have to learn somehow, and you learn by listening and seeking out diverse perspectives. And that's really what I want to hit home to. If you're an Asian American, you shouldn't just be looking at the Asian American experience. Look at the diverse experiences of many people of color who have shared lived experience. And really understanding the history of adoption and foster care is huge. The internet is your friend, right? You can find the data, the stats, the history of the rise of adoption in Western culture, the countries that were really taken advantage of, I would say, by Western cultures, and just how that parallels, right, to the white supremacy systems, the patriarchal systems, capitalism, right? There's a lot of talk about, unfortunately, how many people with these lived experiences experienced, even to the point of like being trafficked because of these systems, right? So really having a full understanding of the broader issues around adoption and foster care is really important for you to understand and know how you feel about it, how you fit into this larger ecosystem of experiences, because none of our experiences are the same. There's similarities.
That goes to people in general, right? It's like, really, I like what you said, because those principles can be applied to anything. And I think it really builds tolerance among people, because even within communities, individuals have different experiences and opinions. And I mean, unfortunately, sometimes they go at each other's throat. And I'm like, well, can't, just that naivety in my mind of like, can't we all just get along and like be peaceful and, just try to respect each other? And that is a reality of having differing opinions. And like you said, really stepping back and active listening, because a lot of it comes down to not feeling heard. And then there's other folks that just say very spiteful things, and you're just like, okay, bye. Like,
yes.
bye, boo. Like, we're good. But I think just going back to that idea of like education, active listening, really valuing people's stories and not trying to find loopholes or saying invalidating things to them is just kind of good practice, no matter where people come from or what they've experienced. And so I guess the other question is, we've been focusing a lot on the adoptee, which I think is so important. And you're also interacting with folks that really may have no understanding of an adoptee's experience. So how can folks kind of also dive a little bit deeper and support, be an ally of individuals and communities that have these experiences?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for adoptees and foster care alumni, that's the realities of our lives, right? We're often interacting with people that don't really understand what this means at all. And I think one particular commonality a lot of us experience, right, are really well-meaning but insensitive questions. So people that don't know anything about adoption or foster care, they don't know anybody in their sphere that has these experiences. And, they only really know what the concepts are and what the terms are, but they don't know it in actuality. So when you have an urge to ask an adoptee or foster care alumni questions about their experience, just stop and pause and think about, is this something that I would be comfortable being asked? Is this something that's my business? Usually the answer is no. So literally just stopping and thinking before you're asking questions, that's huge. That means that you are you're showing real-time empathy to somebody, right? Being like, would I want to be asked this? No. So don't ask it. Because a lot of us have varied experiences with adoption and foster care, go into a conversation or into an environment with an adoptee or a foster care alumni with zero assumptions about their lived experience. And instead of asking them, where are you from? Or, the foster care experience you had must have been horrible, because that's not true for everybody, right? Some have okay experiences, some have really bad experiences, some have good. Instead of going into a conversation like that or asking an insensitive question like that, literally just say, tell me your story, and it opens the door for the adoptee or foster care alumni to have ownership of their story.
It's open-ended.
Open-ended instead of the assumption that you want to pull out of them. And that's true, right? For you and I as women of color, that's true for us in general. Just ask us what our story is. Don't ask us what it's like to be Asian or whatever. Allow us to tell you what we want to share with you. And then, like you said before, right, emphasizing my point, just listen and be open to challenging your assumptions and biases about our experiences.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about too is even among foster parents or caregivers and those that are in the adoption process, really asking kids and thinking of them as experts. Like, what would you like to learn about? What would you like to know? Even if they don't have the answers, like clearly kids would want to know, oh, who are my biological parents? But to be honest with them to some extent when they're, emotionally capable to hear that kind of thing and engage that and talk with them about it, I think it gives them a sense of agency, to really express what they need and not assume what they need.
Yeah, and I think it's important for parents to recognize and remember, right, adoptive parents, that they are not the experts of the lived experiences of adoptees and
Mm-hmm.
foster youth. They are the experts of what it's like to be a parent of
Sure.
those individuals, but they're not the expert of those with lived experiences, but often they are looked at as that. And so in general, like to your whole point of, if you're not as familiar with these systems, or you're trying to be a better ally, et cetera, I think the overall point I'm trying to hit is center the adoptee voice, center the foster alumni voice, because they are, to your point, the experts of their lived experience. And we are not hearing their voices as much as we are hearing the parents' voices or the institution's voices that cause the harm, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really, I want to shift that narrative. I want to shift the approach of how we look at these systems and these experiences to centering those adoptees and a foster care alumni, centering their experiences first.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your experiences, which I've gotten so much out of it and really opened up my own perspective. Where can folks learn more about the initiative and learn more about your work?
Yeah, no, thank you. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Grace Young Foster on LinkedIn. And I do some programming on LinkedIn with various foster care alumni and adoptee voices and advocates. And for the Inclusion Initiative, we are theinclusioninitiative.com, and our Instagram handle is at the Inclusion Initiative LLC. And you can find us there, follow us, like our page, support us. And I also encourage you to join the community. So whether you want to be an ally or you're a person with this lived experience yourself, joining our community allows you to be able to participate and contribute and benefit from the work that we're doing in terms of advocacy, education, and ultimately providing resources for professionals with these lived identities. So it's really important, right, that everyone is involved and everyone contributes. So you can find out how to do that on our website. Can I just plug a few adoptees and foster care alumni?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Yes. So if you are interested in hearing more of these voices, you want to become more educated and just, be a part of this ecosystem and learn. My good friend, Patrick Armstrong, he's a really great voice.
That's the person that came to my mind when I was talking about social media advocates, to talk about the pitfalls of adoption.
We have very different experiences, but our advice and opinions are very similar. There is Angela Tucker, who's also a huge voice in the adoptee community. She is a Black adoptee, is creating a mentorship program, many, many things. She's great, has a book, a documentary, all of that. On Instagram, the Black adoptee, that's an amazing profile to follow. So lots of education on stigmas and all of that through that profile. Lonell Long, who is the founding director of Intercountry Adoptee Voices. and her organization talks about adoptions that are happening all over the world. Mm-hmm. So not just Western adoptions, but adoptions, all over. So super interesting, great place to get educated and resourced. And then in the foster care community, there is a man named Sixto Candle who founded Think of Us. It's an amazing policy and advocacy organization for foster youth in the foster care systems. He's doing amazing things.
Thank you so much. And it's so wonderful that you came on to plug others. And I think that's giving back to the community as well.
Thank you. This has been truly a pleasure. Thank you for elevating adoptee voices and foster care alumni voices and just everything you do for our communities to advocate for mental health and equity and inclusion. I really appreciate you.
Happy to do it. Thank you so much, Grace. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you sharing your experience today. In our next episode, Dr. Samartha Brennan Prescott and I discuss ways to thrive with multiple sclerosis, including advocating for yourself in the healthcare system and connecting with the community. Self-compassion is key as we navigate addressing our own health and the health of our loved ones.